Hey guys, I just want to make a quick sort of video to show people basically what I'm talking about when I'm talking for healing versus damage efficiency. Alright, this is a concept that I will talk a lot about, um, and I'm happy to go super in depth for the people who want me to go super in depth for. If you don't care for that, if you just sort of care for the end result, then that's sort of the stuff that I want to go for, and it sort of depend from fight to fight. But it's basically a big question of how your damage efficiency compares to your healing efficiency. Right, every healer is going to have a damaging toolkit and a healing toolkit, and each of those toolkits will have spells that are very strong and spells that are not as strong in terms of both their mana and most likely their globals, right? How long it actually takes to get that damage out, get that healing out, right? So looking at this Auguzar pool, this is just one that I've grabbed from Sunday. I think it was our best attempt that we just got the boss into the phase. You can see how much damage the raid is taking. This is the decisions you're going to have to make as a healer, both from fight to fight and from moment to moment during the fight. This is a very nice fight to look at because the damage taken is very linear. It starts very low, you can see like 20, 30, 40, 50k, but by the end, before we hit that intermission, we're looking at close to 1 million DPS. And so this is the reason that towards the end of it, all our healers really need to be blasting. Towards the beginning, they need to be blasting DPS. These are polar opposites. This is the damaging, where you really want to be doing damage, and this is the healing phase, where you really need to be doing the healing. Looking at the damage that our healers managed to do, it's pretty decent, right? Depending on how much gear and globals and whatnot is committed to the damage, but you can see that even as hard as our healers are working, it just pales in comparison to losing so much as 1 DPS. Not making examples out of anyone. I know K died early on this fight and he can't hit the ads because he is hitting the boss. It's just, I'm sorry state of BM hunters for this fight, right? Even though the healers are trying their best, it's just not worth it, right? Every DPS needs to be kept alive, and they need to be kept alive for the entire fight. As soon as anyone goes down, DPS or otherwise, without a BRS, it's a wipe, it's a reset. So going back to this damage taken, you can see how this scales nice and linearly. If you're wondering what I'm talking about when I talk about damage versus healing, how they come together, this is the sort of decision making that you want to be doing. This is a Resto Shaman kind of toolkit that I just threw up here because it's something I've talked about a lot, and it's probably one of the easiest to look at, right? So this is the sort of damaging toolkit that you'll have as a Resto Shaman versus a healing toolkit. Don't worry too much about the individual spells and how much they heal for what they do. All you need to know is that these towards the top are your best healing ones. They heal for the most per global. These ones at the bottom are your less good. They don't heal for as much per global. These tend to be the ones you can spam, right? That's because they're not very efficient. They don't have a cooldown, they're not that good. You can still use them if you need the healing, but otherwise there are better things. Same with your damage. Flame Shock is a dot, you can only have it ticking for so long, one at a time, right? Otherwise you have to resort to your other damaging toolkit abilities. So there's sort of different phases when the Auguzar fight. I've kind of just picked 3 to talk about. This is the start of the fight where we pretty much just don't want anyone doing any healing whatsoever, right? Throwing a Riptide or a Hot or whatever on a tank who's currently tanking is fine. That's great to do. Keep in mind that all the healers are going to be thinking like this, so maybe, play the mind game, take a step above and realize that every other healer is going to be throwing on a Riptide or a Hot on the tank. Therefore, you can just keep doing your damage. So for the first minute, all of your damaging priority, that's why I have it in red, is going to sit above your healing priority. Going from top to bottom, this is the most efficient spell that you can cast, going down to your least efficient, right? Going from top to bottom. Coming towards the end of the fight, which is what I've got here, is the polar opposite. Everyone's taking a shit ton of damage. We're borderline phasing the fight depending on how much DPS and whether everyone's alive, obviously. Every one of our healers needs to be doing a shit ton of healing at the end of the fight. This makes it a little bit easier for 5 healing, but for the most part, all of this healing priority will sit above all the damage priority. Does that make sense? So these damaging spells, while they'll still do just as much damage, the damage is not as important compared to the healing. Because as soon as you take off parts of this healing, you potentially lose the DPS. So looking at these damaging abilities, they're going to do as much damage as they ever were or are. But because we're towards the end of the boss fight, everyone's taking heaps of damage. People, whether they live or not for certain arc occurrences, it's very touch and go. That's why the healing is more important, because any one of these heal casts can be the difference between DPS living or DPS dying. As soon as one of those DPS die, and then we don't have a battle res, this all becomes irrelevant. right? The damage that you're going to be doing as a healer, even if you're doing this as best as you possibly can, is just not going to be anything compared to a DPS. So you have to make sure that you're keeping everyone alive as a healer before you worry about your damaging rotation. Towards the end of the fight, like we just saw, the incoming damage is close and sometimes going over 1,000,000 here, DPS. So you can see just how important this healing is to keep everyone alive versus the start of the fight. This part of the fight, damaging rotation very low priority. Start of the fight, damaging rotation very high priority. The damage is more important. There's no healing to be done. No one's taking any damage. Compared to this, everyone's taking a lot of damage, and the damage that needs to be done isn't really on you, right? It's not as much your problem. Your job is to keep everyone alive so the DPS can do the damage they need to do. Towards the middle of the fight, this is where things will get a little bit more complicated, is determining how these damage abilities and healing abilities will sort of socket into each other. I have a sort of few different setouts here. Again, these aren't very specific. I don't want you writing these exactly down. I just want to cement this sort of idea, this concept of how your damaging abilities, those in red, fit in with your healing abilities, which are those in green. This sort of 1 minute to 2 minute 30 mark is a bit of everything. It starts off light kind of damage, but it scales towards quite heavy damage and so on and so forth the rest of the fight. So you need to be able to know, based on your class, your spec, your gear, how efficient your healing spells are and how efficient your damaging spells are. And you need to be able, in your head, you don't need to write this down like this obviously, but you need to be able to know when you should be casting what, if that makes sense. How valuable is that flame shock, that moonfire, that sunfire? How valuable is that to be getting out on the boss right now compared to if I spent that global casting a Riptide, a Rejuve, a Regrowth, a Flash Heal, whatever? So generally speaking, your efficient damaging spells are going to sit sort of somewhere towards the middle ahead of your filler spells, right? Like your chain heal. And then your filler damaging spells are always going to sit at the bottom. They don't generally want to be cast unless you're really worried about mana, because they don't cost mana, or you really need the damage. If you're sitting here wondering, I have no idea how my abilities fit together in this sort of a way, I don't know from pool to pool, based on how many heals we have or whatever, how much damage I need to be doing, feel free to come to me or any of the officers, or there's a whole heap of guides on Wowhead, IC Veins, YouTube. Just watching people's gameplay on Twitch and whatnot can be super helpful. Just knowing how important your damaging abilities are going to be. Right. If you're looking for just a rule of thumb, what the advice that I would generally give whenever you come over here to like WoW Analyzer is just to look at your core efficient spells. It's a super easy page to get to. You just pop in the logs that we post in Discord every raid night into WoW Analyzer and have a look at this shit. This will be on here for DPS, tanks, healers. It's for everyone. There's a whole bunch of information about what you're doing wrong, and it'll pick up even the smallest of things. I actually love the site, but the important things I want you guys to focus on is the core efficient spells, right? For Resto Druids, you don't have as many compared to, as you can see, the Resto Shaman, there's quite a few. And the rule of thumb that I would generally give to people when you're just healing just a new fight that you don't know a lot about is keep your core efficient spells on cooldown all of the time, and then do your damage rotation, right? Once you get through your damage rotation cooldowns, then go to your filler healing spells as a priority above your filler damaging spells, if that makes sense. So here we have our 5 sort of Resto Shaman core efficient spells. Use these on cooldown, keep them on cooldown, top of your priority list, generally what you want to be doing. Once these are on cooldown, then you worry about is Flame Shock your dot up on the boss, and then if that's on the boss, cast your Lava Burst. If you're out of charges, then you go back to just filler healing. And again, this will look different from spec to spec, class to class, but this is sort of the rule of thumb that I would be giving to people if they don't feel comfortable making these sort of decisions themselves, is keep your core efficient spells on cooldown because they will heal for a lot, they're very efficient. Then worry about your damage rotation priority, and then just cast your fillers. For Resto Druids, this looks a little bit different. Wild Growth is on its own little zone because it's actually really complicated, but your Life Bloom is exceptionally efficient. You want to be keeping this number close to 100%. Efflorescence is exceptionally efficient. Again, you want to be keeping this close to 100%. Same with Wild Growth. These 2 logs are just random people I've grabbed from the Mythic Auxiliary Kill, right? These guys have killed this boss, and you can still see how many errors that they have, how low a lot of their uptimes are. These guys can be improved a lot. If you're looking for individual sort of spec help like this, like I'm happy to help you out again, or look for those other resources online. But in terms of how your efficiency is going to work from spec to spec, again, generally speaking, keep your most efficient spells, the ones that have the cooldowns, up and active, and then worry about your damage spells that have cooldowns, and then resort to your filler healing. Again, you can look through these rankings for different fights. This is Orgazoa damage versus healing for Resto Druids for mythic kills. Very easy to see how much figures people are getting in each field, the trinkets that are running, the Azurite traits, the essences, so on and so forth. Each of these is a log in and of itself. You can click on it and you can find out exactly when they're casting what and go very in depth into that. But what I want to focus on is the gear, is making that decision on how you want to gear, because there's a lot that goes into the decisions that you make gear wise. I can show you my gear, and for anyone who's interested, I can go super in depth into why I have every piece of this gear here, why all of these stats are distributed the way they are. I'm not going to right now, but the idea is that each of these stats, just like the spells that we're talking about before, will have an efficiency based on how much damage they can give you versus how much healing they can give you. Same with your Azurite, same with your talents. This is sort of how this game works at the moment, right? Is how much throughput you can get from each piece of gear, each decision that you make for gearing up your character. Don't worry too much if you don't understand it. Again, I'm happy to help. Or you can head on over to these rankings and see what people have taken, why they've taken it. And I can look at this and say, even though I don't want to do a shit ton of damage, I know, for example, that Leviathan's Lure is a very good damaging trinket for Resto Druids for this fight, because there's lots of ads, I guess, and you can dot up the ads. High Noon's also a really good Azurite trait, deals a lot of damage, particularly when there's ads up. You kind of get where I'm going with this. So generally, this is sort of the idea that I've been wanting to talk about, is how your damaging rotation, your healing rotation, not necessarily complement each other, but how you go about making the decisions as to which to cast, right? Your sort of first step is understanding your healing rotation and your damaging rotation outside of each other. And then once you know that, you know which of your spells are your best, your strongest, and which are your weakest. Once you know that, then your big step 2 in this whole concept is understanding how they fit into each other. Like so, is your damaging rotation all the way down the bottom, is it in the middle, or is it up the top like we have here? Then again, this will change from fight to fight, from moment to moment. Like, these are the same fight, but your rotation will change drastically because the incoming damage changes drastically, even if it does scale really linearly, as you can see. Make sure we're also using pre-pots, because pre-pots are essentially free damage. If you don't find yourself needing the mana because you are running mana essences, then consider running a second combat potion, because that's also something you can do for free damage. These potions do, if I can show you that the damage that we do with potions of Unbridled Fury, they do about 160, 170k. You can see just exactly how much they do. There's a couple of naughty people not pre-podding on here, but even as a healer and as a tank too, it's free damage. They're in the guild bank. Ask anyone to get them out for you if you can't do it yourself. If you don't need a mana potion because you find yourself being particularly mana efficient throughout the fight, feel free to use another one throughout the fight, because again, it's an extra 170, 180, 190k. Right, if you have any questions about any of this stuff, how you find out this information from logs, from guides, from YouTube, from whatever, again, feel free to come talk to me, any of the officers, any of the raid leaders. They'll be happy to talk about this sort of thing. But this is a concept that I think we can do a lot better, because we often have people doing basically the opposites of each other. We have a lot of people doing this sort of a thing even when we need the healing, right? And you get a kind of lopsided HPS reflection amongst the healers, is you get a lot of healers who are doing a ton of damage, but they're just not doing any healing. And that's good in a sense that you're getting the damage out there, but in terms of your total output, it's inefficient, right? It's still low. You're doing a lot of damage, sure, but the healing that you're sacrificing to do all that damage is just not worth it. It's very hard to say sort of 1k HPS equals 1k DPS, right? It's pretty hard to do that. You can absolutely say 1k HPS is more than 0.5k HPS when you're making decisions about which healing spells are better. This is never going to be as concrete, right? But for example, you can sort of know that if you have a spell that's going to do 20k HPS, it's probably better than a spell that's going to do 1k DPS, right? You kind of get that idea when it gets closer to the line, you have to start making that decision, getting a feel for how important is my damage versus how important is my heal at any given time. You also have people, on the other side of things who are smashing out HPS. It's really great to see. Everyone thinks they're amazing healers, but when you look at the damage they're doing, they're not doing any, right? They're not running the efficient damaging trinkets, the damaging spells that they could be applying for a few globals every now and then, and they're giving up too much damage in order to get that extra HPS. That's why we sort of end up with some healers doing, for example, like 50k HPS, but they're doing, 18k DPS, right? Versus some healers that are doing 90k HPS, but they're doing 1k DPS, right? Both of these are not good, right? I wouldn't call either of these healers particularly exceptional. They're providing a throughput, sure, but you can find a much better even ground, you'll find, depending on how much experience you have with your spec, doing something like 80k HPS, right? Less than this, but significantly more than this, but you're still able to squeeze out, 10k DPS. For example, right? You can see sort of healer 1, 2, 3. These are the figures that they're pulling. You can kind of see that healer number 3 is generally the better healer. Right, if I take this DPS figure down because it's a bit too generous, but you can sort of see what I'm talking about. Even though the HPS and DPS don't exactly equate, right? You'll get to a point where if you want to put out more damage, you're giving up too much HPS, and you end up with this kind of a look. Even though you are doing a lot of DPS over the course of the fight, you're giving up too much HPS. It's not an efficient trade. Whereas this person's sure gaining a lot of HPS, but for every K HPS above this that you're gonna try and get, you're giving up almost all of your DPS. That's why I would say that this person is potentially playing the most efficiently, the most optimally, because they're still doing a lot of damage whilst also doing a lot of healing. They're not doing the most damage, right? This person's doing more damage, not doing the most healing. This person's doing the most healing, but in terms of their raw output across both domains, they're the ones who are succeeding the most, and that will come from understanding exactly how these fit together. Again, the exact figures aren't particularly important, the names of these buffs and whatnot, these exact figures themselves. I just wanted to get across the idea that it is important to do damage, it always is, it's important to do healing, it always is, but there will be different fights and different points in the fights, depending even on our raid setup, that will determine how much damage you should be doing and how much healing, and when you should be doing each of those damage and healing spells. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.